Well, footage has emerged of yet another radical Islamic hate preacher and a warning some of what he said is offensive. Sydney cleric Ahmed Zood gave a 35-minute sermon at a mosque in Sydney's southwest on December 22, in which he called Jews monsters and thirsty for bloodshed, and described how they ran like rats from Hamas terrorists on October 7.
أهم صفة من صفات اليهود هي أنهم شعب متعطش لسفك الدماء، شعب يحب سفك الدم، فهم يربون أولادهم منذ الصغر وينشئونهم على الإرهاب، على العنف، على القتل. كان هؤلاء الجبناء يتساقطون أمام ضربات المجاهدين ويفيقون منهم كالجرذان.
Joining me now is Shadow Home Affairs and Cyber Security spokesman James Paterson. James, thank you for joining me. It's starting to feel a bit like Groundhog Day, the amount of times we've discussed hate preachers here in Australia. We've already seen government authorities fail to act on prior hate preaching. What do you think it will take for them to finally do something?
I honestly wonder, Caroline, what it will take, how bad it has to get, how overt the incitement has to be before our state and federal governments will use the extensive anti-vilification, anti-incitement, anti-harassment laws that have been passed in recent decades at the state and federal level, which were put in place with exactly these scenarios in mind, with exactly this purpose in mind. I mean, let's step back and think about this preaching and this cleric. What is the purpose of delivering a sermon like that to a congregation? What is the reason that you would engage in that? Well, I'm greatly concerned that the purpose of it is to incite people to commit an act of violence. I'm deeply concerned that that will be the result of it, whether that's the intention or not. And why should we tolerate this kind of incitement to violence in our country? Is it going to make our country stronger? Is it going to make us more pluralistic? Is it going to make us more tolerant? Or is it going to divide us? And frankly, the way in which the Albanese government has stood by and watched while this happened, while taking no action at all, is a great stain on them.
And I know it's deeply concerning for the Jewish community and many others, of course, too. But moving overseas now, there has been a major escalation in the Israel-Hamas conflict overnight after Hamas's deputy leader was killed in an airstrike in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. James, your response?
Well, this is yet more evidence why, of course, Australians should not travel to Lebanon at all, and they particularly should not be in southern Lebanon, which is an area of conflict between the listed terrorist organisation Hezbollah and the IDF, who are responding to their rocket attacks over the border. And it's yet more evidence why the Albanese government needs to consider instituting a declared area in southern Lebanon, which would make it an offence for an Australian without a proper reason to be there, and it would act as a disincentive. We already have at least one Australian who's been claimed by Hezbollah as a fighter, and another Australian who visited them who were killed in an IDF attack. I don't want to see any more Australians killed there, and I don't want to see any more Australians radicalised and equipped with the skills of terrorism in southern Lebanon fighting with Hezbollah. Frankly, there needs to be much more action from the government on this. But unfortunately, our Minister for Home Affairs, our Minister for Foreign Affairs, they are all missing in action.
Well, the government has so far resisted those calls to declare parts of Lebanon a no-go zone, as you argue that they should. Do you think they've now missed their chance, given this latest escalation?
There's still time. I mean, I fear that the conflict in southern Lebanon and northern Israel could get much, much worse. We all know that the capacity of Hezbollah to launch much broader and wider attacks on Israel and Israel's capacity to respond to that would be utterly devastating for the people of the region. And so any Australian who is still there must leave, and no Australian should contemplate going there. But we shouldn't leave it to chance, and we shouldn't rely on a DFAT travel advice alone. We should put some teeth behind it and say it's a crime to be in this area unless you have a lawful exemption to be there. That's why I think the Albanese government still has time to act, but I don't want to see them delay any longer before this becomes a full-blown war.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on what they do there and see if they listen to your wise caution. But turning to other news now, it was revealed yesterday that 2 more of the detainees who were freed following that controversial High Court ruling have been rearrested, bringing the total number to 7. James, I'm sure the government was hoping it could just sweep this one under the rug, but clearly this issue isn't going anywhere. How do you think they need to deal with this?
Well, Caroline, the day after the High Court handed down its ruling on indefinite detention, I went on television and I advised the Albanese government to urgently pass a preventative detention regime so that the most highest risk of these 150-odd people who are going to be released could be redetained and the community could be protected. Now, for weeks they resisted, but eventually they acknowledged that that was the best course of action to protect the community, and the Parliament rushed through these laws to protect the community. Well, guess how many times the Albanese government has used this special preventative detention regime since then? 0. 0 times they've used these special new powers that were supposed to protect the community. What I want to know is, what are they waiting for? How bad does it have to get? How many crimes do these re-released detainees have to commit before they actually use the powers that Parliament gave them to protect the community and get the hardened criminals among them off the streets where they can't do any harm to the Australian community?
Well, it's been 7 in just a matter of a few weeks. We'll see how many more there has to be before they listen. Victoria's court system has become the latest victim of a cyber attack, with hackers potentially getting hold of sensitive information from hundreds of court cases. James, this is just the latest in a string of ransomware attacks in the past year or so. The St Vincent's Health Network was hacked. Yakult shortly after that. We spoke about some of those cases last week, and of course the Medicare attack earlier in the year and Optus the year before. Do we just need to accept that none of our information is safe online?
We shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't accept that from big companies, and we especially shouldn't accept that from government entities who have a special obligation to protect the sensitive data that they hold on our behalf. This looks like a very serious cyber attack, not because of the number of people affected, but because of the nature of the information that they held. I mean, these are courts that hold suppressed hearings. These are courts that hear evidence from people with protected identities. And these are courts that hear cases, for example, involving gangland violence, serious organised crime, drug trafficking, murders and other serious offences. And many of the people who testify do so on the understanding and the promise that their identity will be protected. So it is a shocking thing if the Victorian court system has failed those people, but it is even worse that it doesn't appear to be on the federal government's radar. They should be stepping in to assist here to get to the bottom of this and find out what has been stolen, who has taken it, where it is, and what we can do to protect those witnesses who testified in good faith and hoping that they will be protected. But frankly, again, we say, where is the cybersecurity minister? We have an acting cybersecurity minister. We have an acting national coordinator on cybersecurity. It seems that people who are actually paid to do these jobs are too busy to be focused on these really critical issues.
Yeah, you're right. The very nature of this information, which has been compromised in itself, is just so much more concerning than perhaps even previous hacks. But before I let you go, Anthony Albanese gave his first press conference of the year this morning, vowing to make cost of living relief his government's priority in 2024. James, I guess better late than never, but there wasn't a lot of detail there. How confident are you that the Prime Minister will actually follow through on this promise?
Well, it's only taken the Prime Minister nearly 2 years to work out that the number one priority for the Australian people is cost of living. He spent his first 18 months as Prime Minister utterly obsessed with dividing our country through The Voice, and he spent $500 million of taxpayers' money on that. He's now realised maybe that wasn't such a great idea, but all he's doing is asking the Department of the Treasury and the Department of Finance to come up with some ideas for cost of living. He doesn't have any ideas of his own. He's not ready to introduce any schemes to alleviate the financial pressure that Australians are under. He just thinks they should continue to suffer before he comes up with a plan to deal with it. I mean, this just shows how distracted this government has been, how its priorities are wrong, and how the Prime Minister in particular has become just so out of touch since he got elected. He seems to be much more focused on his international travel, on the VIP flights, on going to the tennis and going to the cricket and things like that, rather than the core issues that Australians elected him to deal with.
Senator James Paterson, thank you. Always a pleasure to chat to you.